In part one, we had a great time breaking down a variety of topics with Craig Lipset. I am really looking forward to jump into part two, where we discuss a range of topics from navigating diversity in clinical trials, the impact of tech acquisitions on pharma, the biotech mafia, delving into site network. We'll discuss generative AI, build versus buy. We'll talk about edge machine learning. We'll ask Craig Lipset, is DCT, Decentralized Clinical Trials, dead? And then we'll end the call with Craig's advice to future aspiring industry leaders. Let's get right into it. I want to go back to a comment you made earlier about the study that the investigator is looking for Black women to participate in New York and what have you. Let's talk a little bit about diversity. I think this is your second, basically, insight in 2024. What's happening politically and how everybody is like now. It's like the backlash of using the word diversity, and somehow really diversity in clinical trials is getting lost in the middle of this fight and what have you. How can we get out of this? Because this is an important endpoint for the patients of different colors, ethnicity, etc. That's part of our research. And how can we avoid getting lost in the middle of this?
Again, I'll fall back on, there's the future that I want to be, and there's the future that I think we're dealing with in the near term. And it was Sachin Jain, who is a fabulous leader in healthcare, who I had seen a post of his in Forbes, sharing a reflection, a fear, but a forecast nonetheless of the challenges for DEI in healthcare going forward. And even forecasting that we're just going to see chief diversity officers vanish as a role inside of some of these organizations this year. Again, it's not Sachin's wish either, nor is it mine, but we can see it already in the hyperpolarized space of Twitter, X, or Republican primaries in the presidential election cycle. The terms of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion are becoming highly politicized and polarized. And for us, there's important reasons for why we need diversity in clinical trials, right? For us, this isn't just, there's a lot of important reasons for DEI initiatives, but here for our clinical trials, there's a sound scientific and clinical rationale, right? The data that we generate of the efficacy and safety of medicines is going to be used for treatment decision making for a lot of diverse patients.
Right.
And if that data does not represent them, if it's just people that look like me, then the data may not hold truth for them for those decisions to be made. But if our efforts to drive diversity in trials are going to get jammed up in political rhetoric and get lost or siloed or deprioritized because of political noise, that would be a clinical and scientific mistake and tragedy. And so do we educate and try to train and retrain people to take defensive positioning, or do we have to embrace certain other words? And the path of less resistance to me would be to start to talk more about representation in trials in the very near term. Now, as a white guy, I feel lousy saying this. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, a Black man who leads a diversity program for clinical trials. And I felt horrible telling him that I think he should be dropping the word diversity from his language this year. But the work that he and so many others are doing is really important. And I just worry about their ability to sustain and get the attention and resource that they need in this climate versus, other words that may be viewed as less controversial.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree because you've seen people are talking about racism, and we've seen recently the president of Harvard, Claudine, gay, resigned and what have you. we probably don't have a choice but choose a different word. I think we want to move on with the clinical trials. There's no reason to fall in this backlash, or what have you. No
I
question about
don't think we have the luxury to say that this work will not be placed at risk. We then have either two choices: to try to keep training and re-educating people, but that can easily fall on deaf ears. I watch these posts that people like Mark Cuban are dropping on X, right? And he's trying to make the case that for him, diversity is making sure I have a broad talent pool from which I then pick the best, most qualified person. Right? Like, all he wants out of diversity and equity is to make sure that as many different people are represented in that talent pool. And then from there, he's going to get the most talented person. But just trying to explain that just gets lost. It was so much polarization today. And I fear that if we try to explain our rationale for using the term, it's going to wind up the same.
Agree. You know, as we move into the next stage, you talked about talents and what have you, and one way of probably acquiring new skills or new capabilities is acquisitions. I saw in your insights talking about tech acquisitions. You talked about like the next wave of acquisitions because of the economy challenges or what have you. How do you see? I mean, the beauty when we have many companies, I think that kind of sparks innovation. Do you foresee this as having an impact on the innovation in this industry? Because a lot of times when these small companies get swollen by the big companies, they almost get lost in translation. I'll give you one example, and then when I started a CRO, worked for a small company called Genetics Institute in Cambridge that got acquired by American Home Product that became Wyeth later, right? It was a small company, and we taught like all the innovation, it just like you fall into the bureaucracy of all the different things that happen at a bigger company. And we thought we're a giant also, because I don't want to eliminate that. And the reason why I say that, because 2009, basically, that's when Pfizer acquired Wyeth, and we thought nobody will be able to acquire us. We're a giant, right? And guess what? That happened. So taking into consideration with the tech industry and the CROs and what have you, do you think more acquisitions is going to kill innovation, or are they acquiring these different companies to just get the clients and then shut them down and move forward? Love to hear your perspective in this.
So in that LinkedIn post, I used the phrase "the fall of acquisitions," and there's two reasons for that, right? One, seasonality. I do think by this fall, we will see this cash crisis, that a number of tech companies will have stretched out their runway, not trying to take more capital at a lower valuation, but just trying to bridge and stretch things out, in the hopes that business will recover, in the hopes that pharma and others will start to spend more again. And I just don't think that's going to be happening soon enough. And so some of these companies will become assets on the market for acquisition. But I also think about, exactly as you said, the fall of acquisitions, in that all too often in our space, well, we're really not good as an industry at acquisitions. Pharma is great at acquisitions. Pharma can buy a biotech and keep that portfolio going. And, Pfizer will buy Seagen, and the Seagen portfolio of medicines will be just fine, right? Because they're good at that. But when we see tech companies get acquired by CROs or merged under large private equity umbrellas with other assets, we haven't seen those technologies flourish. We tend to see them vanish. And when we start to see these deals happening with younger and smaller companies, we're seeing the innovators in our space that had not really reached their prime and potential vanish. really before they had that chance. Now, the good news here is there is capital out there for young seed and Series A companies, because their valuations are not, outrageous based on a bubble of 2 years ago. And so there will be a backfilling and maybe more market opportunity for some of those younger companies to grow than they might have had otherwise. But it would be wonderful if our industry could pause for a moment on the M&A burn and just look and see, are we any good at this? Are any of the companies that we've acquired really still flourishing and reaching their potential? Or do we buy these because we can, and then we're basically watching them die?
Yeah, interesting. I wonder if this could lead to, you're probably familiar with the term PayPal Mafia, right? Which is basically that's where Elon Musk came from. LinkedIn and other big names, this is like started there, they sold their shares, they get the, and then moved on and they just created big other giants basically. So that's the other potential, so as well, so.
That would be nice. I mean, we've had biotech mafias in our industry, right? The whole of South San Francisco is a Genentech mafia in a good way, right? All of that biotech innovation. So that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And certainly, the Genetics Institute (GI) was a part of that Cambridge mafia, much the same, which is certainly a great thing in terms of just creative talent, building and building.
It's amazing here in Boston and Cambridge, specifically around Kendall Square, around MIT, just between Harvard and MIT, you see the number of the biotechs out here, just crazy, crazy.
It's fabulous, and there's always M&A activity there. Things get acquired, but hopefully with healthy capital markets, the innovators can keep, building and creating.
Yeah. So it's interesting, besides this, I personally think, and I would love to hear your opinion, is the dryness of the drug pipeline right now with the big pharma, and potentially there's probably going to be a lot of acquisitions, I feel like, in 2024 in order really to enrich that digital data pipeline. And we've seen a lot of stories right now in the industry related to this. Actually, one of the editech solutions, the company I work for, is really nicely centered to move data around from one company to another with really automation, to take all these disparate sources, conform them to a standard, and then potentially enable, other companies to consume that data. And we feel this is a good business case that we think it's going to be one of the selling points for our product. I don't know, what's your thoughts there, basically? So.
Well, I mean, we're recording this right now. It's the week of the JP Morgan JPM
Oh yeah, yeah,
healthcare
true, true,
conference,
yes, yes.
right? So it's every day there's another headline of which pharma is buying which biotech company.
Yeah,
And you and I know from our time at Pfizer that you buy these companies and their data can live in a lot of different systems, right? Some of them maybe had an in-house system, but if they're a small biotech, their systems were a cacophony of different CROs and different CRO systems where all of that data resides. And so when you make an acquisition like that, are you going to just leave your data from that company fractionalized and siloed in different places? Or how do you map it and normalize it to your data norms and standards, especially if that medicine is, early in development and you're going to be running more studies and ultimately have to compile submissions. And so it is an interesting market opportunity for data mapping that supports biotech M&A activity.
Yeah, I think so. I lived that when we got acquired by Pfizer when I was at Wyeth. I think I spent almost a year plus just to unfortunately decommission systems, but at the same time we had to move all the data, make sure it's valid, compliant, and the studies need to continue to work. We always said the patients are waiting, so we cannot interrupt that. Basically, that was the main, theme basically as we're doing this, so yeah, absolutely. Um, Craig, you start talking about the site network, and you talked about like the increasing interest of private equity in the site networks, and the future acquisitions, etc. Maybe just for the people who doesn't know what site networks mean, maybe just define it, and then talk a little bit about how big CROs, private equity going after site networks. Where is it gonna go? What's the trends? Love to hear your point on this one.
We talk a lot about sites. We talked about sites earlier as well, but in truth, there are a lot of models for what is a research site or a research center. We can think about physicians at large academic medical centers. We could think about physicians who have private practices and do a little bit of research on the side. Some of those docs, maybe that research grew to a point that they spun out a separate research center that would stand alone as its own standalone research site. More and more, those standalone sites are getting acquired into larger and larger networks of sites. There are some good advantages for why that may be the case. There are efficiencies around centralized capabilities, around business development, contracting, other SOPs, systems, quality infrastructure that could be managed centrally and deployed across those networks. For sponsors, there can be perceived efficiencies if I could have a more normalized relationship or a contract that could extend across multiple site locations with different investigators, but through one entity or partner. Not that it might be seen as risky to place my entire study with one network, but it's still much more efficient for me than going around to 20 or 30 different sites at once. And so there's good reason, I think, why these networks have grown. Sites over these last few years have again, because of that resourcing crunch and a host of other factors, there are sites that are financially performing very well. But private equity, if you're not familiar with, private equity investments, private equity really looks for something that is financially performing at a certain level, but with the mindset that if we could bolt lots of other acquisitions onto it, that we could then sell that in 3 years or so, and a transaction that will, make that collective entity better than the sum of its parts, right? And so in this case, if we can grab a lot of sites and add a lot more, maybe in different therapeutic areas, maybe in different geographies, that we'll be able to sell that. And where does private equity sell that, right? Because they only make money if they kind of exit that. Well, they're one of 3 places that private equity, when they have an investment like a big network of sites, goes. It's either an IPO and they try to make it a public company, or private equity will sell it to another private equity firm who wants to sort of take it from there and try to grow it. Or is there someone else who would buy that entity? In the case of a large network of sites, that someone else is probably a CRO. Although there are a couple of other organizations that I hear through the grapevine are at least exploring if that will be a part of their future. IPOs aren't very friendly right now. And so what does that mean if a large top 3 CRO buys a massive network of research sites that maybe in the vaccine space are the go-to network for that therapeutic area? Could a CRO lock up a therapeutic area like vaccine research simply by buying all the sites in one massive purchase and essentially lock other CROs out by only allowing access to those sites if you are using them for the CRO services? Is this how CROs can differentiate in a poorly differentiated category, or is this just a poorly identified antitrust violation of just locking up and securing a monopoly? And perhaps most important, is this good for patients, right? How is this good for patients, and in what way? If a CRO owns a network of sites, there can be good things, right? Maybe it's going to accelerate contracting with sites because it's all through one entity now. And maybe it's going to give me better control to deploy a new technological approach, right? I want to use e-consent. Well, my CRO owns the sites, right? I shouldn't get as much resistance. But is it a good thing when it comes to choice and access for patients, to have things quite as locked up as that?
Interesting. I was gonna ask you about the impact, to the patient care, so would this enable, clinical research to be available for patients as a second option,
That's certainly what, a lot of us in the industry like hope for. And, a lot of that mantra really speaks to that question of, how can standalone sites, whether in a network or otherwise, interface well with places where healthcare is being delivered, right? So if there is a CRO owned research site down the road from my family doc, well, I go to my family doc for care, but are there smart ways that those two places can collaborate to help make research more accessible to me where I'm already receiving care? And my primary care doc is not going to be an investigator in that next vaccine trial. He just doesn't do research. So, how could the two find smarter ways to work together than maybe they have in the past?
Interesting. You kind of like sparked a lot of questions in my head with these comments, but let me take it into the fifth prediction around insourcing versus outsourcing of algorithms. Because in my mind, okay, as a physician, as a primary care provider, I don't have incentives to to send my patient over next door and say, go to this, investigator at PI and let him treat you, etc. I just lost my patient, so I have no incentive to do that. And then the other piece is around, do I even know there's such a research is happening, and I think that takes us into the whole insourcing versus outsourcing of algorithms. Gartner came up with this, what they call their AI opportunity radar, which is they do this piece. It's kind of funny how you used insourcing, outsourcing. They used internal, external, and then everyday usage versus a game-changing, basically, solution. And that, like, if you look at the upper box, this is where your product and services, external and game-changing, right? Versus internal and game changing is core capabilities, how you do your business, etc. And then the everyday falls into the front office, back office, work and what have you. So do you see, let's talk a little bit about this. I feel like there is this whole thing that's I don't want to use the word fighting each other, but like, what is it good for pharma to work everything internally, or they hire those external companies, because we see a lot of innovations happening outside. For one, I feel like Editech and others, I'm sure that everybody's working. We're gonna change, I think, in a couple of years, we're gonna change the way people interact with the data. Oh my God, the stuff we're working on is gonna be a game changer, and it's like ChatGPT. That's why I started. It's that simple prompt. I don't have to click 500 clicks to get where I want. That's exactly the stuff that we call it chat IQ at Editech, so just like you chat with your data, basically. So love to hear,
Manther, as somebody who's been a leader in pharma IT for years, I'm sure you've heard this build versus buy question asked over and over again. And I do find it interesting today, this kind of build versus collaborate versus buy. And there are, we've got so many large pharma that are contracting, they're reducing headcount, and yet still holding on to this idea that they could or should internally develop some of these algorithms and AI-based tools and approaches. Now, I could see some of the rationale for why. If I build it myself, it will be optimized for my workflow, for my organization, and if it becomes core for what I'm doing, I'm not beholden to somebody else if it's a core part of how I'm operating. But these machines, these AI-based tools are often built based on learning from lots and lots of diverse data. And if you're a standalone company that's building that type of algorithm, you may have access to more diverse data. Now, that company has access to lots of data, but it's homogenous, right? It's based on their experience. And so now they're just training a machine based on how they've done things for years. Whereas a company that, or an academic group for that matter, that's external to that pharma might be able to train on far more diverse data from lots of different companies and learn the best practices from across the industry and academic researchers in the field for whatever that machine is meant to do. Now, I think the other challenge, as I think about this with some different pharma companies, has been let's say you do build that algorithm and you've come up with an AI based way to design studies or create automation or QC for regulatory submissions, whatever the it is. Eventually, somebody outside of your company is going to have way more money and support to keep investing in that. Eventually, your organization is going to grow tired of seeing a budget for investing and reinvesting in an algorithm, whereas some other company might have just raised $30 million and they're going full steam. And you are not getting $30 million from your leadership for an algorithm. And so at what point do you acknowledge that what got you here isn't going to get you there? And how do you turn off your internal approach and migrate to something external? You know, for folks in pharma, there's an old phrase, it's easier to kill the chemist than to kill the chemical. If you've got a drug that's moving forward, it can be hard to shut it off. And I think that's going to be the case with some of these investments in internal technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen it all over the years, where you start with the build and there's somebody who's like all for it, then all of a sudden they lose the momentum and they want to decommission it and kill it or what have you. But I think the way I don't know whether you agree or not with me. I see it as an ecosystem. You know, you start within the company to get them comfortable with the technology, etc. Because there's always the concern of ethics and privacy and compliance, etc. It's like, oh my God, you're putting this data in this, network. What if there is data leakage, and what have you? And that gets everybody uncomfortable, So, but well, your CEO just put a question, about this in ChatGPT. Where's the privacy? We want to balance that, right? We don't want to go extremes, right? But I see it as an ecosystem. So there's something also with LLMs, what they call, I forget the exact term, but it get trained on the edges basically. So you get the results from this island. Remember when we did the investigator data bank, like how we have islands of investigators, but nobody knew who has what, etc., unless it's common between them, etc. It's almost the same concept, and you train, and then you just get the output from that into the bigger model in order to protect the privacy and and people, the consent and whatever that you comply with. And that's where I really see the future, is how can we create that ecosystem that enable us to learn from all this historical data, the large data models, exactly like you see with ChatGPT, that can come back with the proposal, etc., from all that information. Why not? I think we can achieve that. I don't know. Do you see it the same way, or do you have a different perspective?
You know, it's an interesting way to think about like a crawl, walk, run and allowing experimentation where you can with some things that may be internally developed, but understand at what point there is then meant to be a handoff as you intend for more scale and longer term support. And I think that is an interesting strategy. I'm sure there are some approaches where it's just going to be too much of an upfront sunk cost to try and develop that in-house. I want to do digital twins. Should I be investing as much as I would need to do that all in-house to run those early experiments? But I think in general, I think it's an interesting strategy to take, that especially for the larger companies that are privileged with the resources to be able to do that, to embrace internal development as if it's early prototyping, and acknowledge when that only gets you so far.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we're gonna see a lot of changes the way we do business. It's exactly, I feel like, the way the iPhone changed the way we interact, and It enabled televisit, and DCT, and the Zoom and the WebEx meetings and all that, and remote working from home offices and what have you. And I think there's a huge change. We just need to learn how. And I love the term always augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. It's not going to get rid of the doctor. It's not going to get rid of the specialist. The two can work nicely. The AI can read the 500 articles, the latest and greatest, and then pinpoint out all these different things and how can we work together. I think this is the new skill that we need to attain, because a lot of people says, oh my God, what's going to happen to my job? What am I going to be doing? Am I going to sitting in the Bahama for the rest of my life and the machine is going to take over my work, because we're talking about process automation, what do you think, Craig? Are you going to be in the Bahama on the beach? Where's
Hey,
the innovation?
nobody can get an appointment with a dermatologist or most other specialists nowadays. So, if AI could not only augment but replace some of those visits, or maybe it's because all the good dermatologists have left practice to go build AI companies, and maybe that's part of the problem.
Uh, so, Bill, Craig, I want to end in a couple of notes. I want to come back to DCT. Everybody I just want to reinforce certain things because people think, well, everybody wanted, as you said, every vendor wanted to have a badge on their name, DCT, because that was the selling point at the time. And, of course, everybody had a different definitions, etc., or what have you. But I think what I heard from you, and I would love if you want to elaborate, it's about optionality. It's about the patient at the end of the day. What is the most convenient way for the patients to participate in the study, the diversity, right? So some people we've seen some of the surveys, the work that we've done with the patients when we serve them. We need to be culture savvy, right? Not everybody likes people to come to their house. Visiting nurse doesn't work. You can't just say this is a visiting for everybody, right? It might work for some people, others, televisit, etc. Um, so I think it's about the patient. Do you want to just kind of like maybe wrap it up around this before, and then I have another question after that, basically. Love to hear.
When you look at things like DTRA's definition of decentralized trials, or for that matter, the definition from FDA or others that are not extremely different from one another, they're very consistent in describing these trials as using decentralized research methods. These are tools and methods, like many others, that we deploy with a purpose to enable better access to research. And so there are some that may be posting and publishing their big vision that the idea of a DCT is dead, that it shouldn't have been a different type of trial. It never was a different type of trial. It's a collection of tools and methods, just as it's always been. But it's being done in a way with purpose. I could use electronic informed consent and have everybody have to go to the clinic to interact with a tablet. I could use a paper consent and use an envelope with a postage stamp and have people participate from home. Decentralizing is not just about using technology, it's about purpose and intent to be able to create those types of options and opportunities for people. If there are some out there that may want to declare the end of decentralized, I wish them well and good luck. But I think the challenge they will run up against is, one, we haven't solved access for patients, and we still are in the business of listening to patients. Two, the regulators have demystified this for us. And so we can no longer say, we can't do it, patient. We can't meet you where you want to be met because of regulation. That's simply not true. And so what's left is for us to have the fortitude to continue to press and learn and develop these processes so that we can get out of this trough, right? Because that's really what we're in the hype cycle, that trough of disillusionment, which requires the hard work, the unsexy work of actually figuring out processes, working through the solutions with partners and vendors, gathering and sharing the data on what's working and what's not, and amplifying that so that we can all do better, reach that plateau that we all aspire to in that Gartner hype cycle.
Nice, nice. I really think we're there, but One of the initiatives we worked on is the 4C, right? The data connectivity at DTRA. And I think some of the terms we heard from people that technology is impeding the advancement of DCT. And I always say DCT really has nothing to do with that. DCT added salt to the wounds, basically, more than anything else. This problem existed from day one. For some reason, in our industry, we don't know how to talk to each other. You take a flight. If it's delayed, you get notified in your cell phone. If you need to switch the flight to another terminal, all this happened automatically. And I think that was the focus for us in the 4Cs when we came up with that whole demo to show how easily this can be accomplished, and it's not millions of dollars. It's really utilize not reinventing the wheels, because we're using standard technology, standard data in order to move data around and immediately get notified when a patient consented, immediately create a form in the ADC system with demographic information, and a consent form, etc. There's no reason for the study coordinators to re-enter all that information over and over, basically.
You stood on a stage and bravely demonstrated interoperable automation, right? Which is kind of intimidating to do on a stage with a live audience, with different partners with different platforms, that if Rick on this end of the stage enters something, well, Munther's system on that end of the stage see something different happen as a result.
And Jordan on the other side, yeah, from Zelta.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's right. And Munther in the middle being the cloud, connecting these different systems. But this is the missing layer for us. We have to get beyond talking about like my eConsent platform is better than your eConsent platform. The eConsent platform that's best is the one that a site is already using, already trained to use, and is ready to use on their next study. And we as sponsors and CROs should be focusing on what matters to us, right? That we can get access to signatures, dates, versions, the data elements that matter for us to track quality and do our job in terms of oversight, and then get out of the way. And for that to happen, this is the type of interoperability we need, and the type of system-to-system interfaces and triggers that we need.
Excellent. Craig, my last question for you. I want to ask you, based on your experience, I mean, it's amazing the stuff you do. I don't know how you do what you do and where you find the time, but man, you're awesome. Now we have newcomers to our industry, those upcoming professionals who's coming into the clinical research, clinical trials. What advice do you give them in order really, I want to put some words in your mouth, sorry, like to challenge the status quo. Let's not just do it because it was there. Let's not do the 10%, the 10 times different. What would you tell them? Is there a book they can read? Is there a magazine they can read? Is there a website? What's that silver bullet,
Well, one is to find great content and conversations, because I don't know that there's one great book to turn to. I mean, there are some interesting books on my bookshelf. Some of the books from Eric Topol, I think, are great examples of the world of the possible in healthcare. But then it's up to you, the reader who's focused on clinical research, to be able to make that connection and make that leap back to say, this is what it means to me. My friend Susanna Fox has a book coming out next month called Rebel Health, which really picks up on those stories of patient disruptors and the incredible things that patients are doing today to improve the healthcare system. And I think there, once again, it's up to us working in clinical research to make that connection and to say, if it can happen there, it can happen here. But to your point, those young professionals entering our field, I mean, are not jaded like old people like you and me, that feel like you can't do it differently because it hasn't been done differently, or we tried that 10 years ago and it didn't work. So park your great idea, because we need those. And sometimes that idea was great 10 years ago, but it just was too early, and it needs that fresh person coming into it today. I teach a course over at Rutgers now that we're or in the spring semester on clinical trial innovation. And I love that opportunity for time with students who, maybe are pivoting in their career or maybe entering in their career here, but really looking to bring that freshness. But not everybody has the opportunity to take, a master's program in research management. And so, engaging like you are here, finding these conversations can be a great way to stay current and keep expanding your mind.
Man, just networking, expanding, really taking and being able to the construct a problem, and figure out like how this all fits together. It's amazing. I remember we at Pfizer, just for the folks who are listening to us, we had a program, that was led by great people at Pfizer called Dare to Try, basically. And one of the things that we've done there, I remember when we were trying to do the patient journey, we didn't get stuck with our own silos, just with our own leadership team. We included the patient, but not only that, we went for outside industry that does this best, like Delta and other industries, and brought them in the room with us. What do you do differently? How do you treat the patient? Why, the passenger feels special, etc. And we try to simulate that. So always, simulation we've done in NYU and what have you. Just say like, is this study's gonna work? The discoveries were amazing there. So kind of like, I invite everybody, really think out of the box, go outside, see what others are doing, be the Steve Jobs, of the clinical trials, make a dent in this world basically, and make the change.
And, for that to happen, it's folks like you, Munther, that are sharing your experiences and gathering and sharing other stories that make yourself available. And, there's one thing from those innovation experiences in big corporations is that improv mindset of always saying yes. And it's so easy to get trained to say no and to find ways to say no. The hard thing is to say yes and yes and you're brilliant at it in terms of building up with ideas and getting those things shared. And I think that's a great, aspiration for all of us in terms of hearing an idea from someone else. Don't take the easy way and just say no, it can't be done, we've already done it. Find that way to say yes and.
I learned from the master. Craig, thank you very much for being here. You're at the forefront, advocating for the patients. I've seen it on all the years we worked together at Pfizer, and you continue to do that. Thank you for your work, for challenging the status quo, for moving us forward in this industry. Thank you.